Somewhere in a writer's room in Los Angeles, two guys who once put a talking pug and a barbarian in a Dungeons & Dragons movie are now holding the keys to the most famous starship in science fiction. No pressure. Here's the situation. Star Trek has not had a real, functioning theatrical movie franchise in 10 years. Not one. The last time a Star Trek movie hit an actual cinema screen was 2016. Since then, we have had exactly one new Star Trek film, and it did not go to theaters at all. It went straight to a streaming app, and I will get to exactly how badly that went in a moment because the numbers are almost funny. But first, let's talk about the actual news because this is bigger than most headlines are treating it. At CinemaCon in April of 2026, Paramount Skydance stood on stage and confirmed something that fans have been circling for months. A brand new Star Trek movie is in development. Not Star Trek 4, not a Chris Pine sequel, not Kirk, not Picard. A completely new movie, unconnected to any timeline, any crew, any starship you have ever seen on screen before. The writers attached are Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley. If those names sound familiar, they should. This is the directing and writing duo behind Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, and before that, they wrote Spider-Man: Homecoming. Both of those films sit above 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. So creatively, this is not a random swing. Paramount picked two of the sharpest comedic adventure writers working today and handed them 60 years of Star Trek history with instructions to basically ignore all of it. Now here's where it gets interesting and where most of the coverage stops short. Multiple Star Trek movies are apparently in motion right now, not just one. Reporting around the CinemaCon announcement suggests there may also be a separate project involving Toby Haynes as director, working on a movie with an entirely new cast, while a different track is rumored to involve the return of the original crew in some form. Paramount has stayed quiet on the specifics. So the honest answer right now is that nobody outside a handful of executives actually knows how many Star Trek movies are coming or whether any of them connect to each other. What we do know is the reasoning behind killing off the so-called Kelvin timeline, the alternate reality J.J. Abrams built back in 2009. That timeline gave us 3 films, starting with a rebooted Star Trek that is, by Rotten Tomatoes math, the single best-reviewed film in the 60-year history of this franchise. 94% with critics, 91% with audiences. Better than Wrath of Khan. Better than First Contact. People forget that because the trilogy fizzled out after Star Trek Beyond underperformed at the box office in 2016 and the cast got older, busier, and considerably more expensive to book for one more sequel. So Paramount let that version of Star Trek die quietly, and it makes sense. Why keep paying blockbuster salaries for a story that has technically already ended twice? Which brings us to the real test. This next movie will be the first Star Trek theatrical film in history without Kirk, without Picard, and possibly without the Starship Enterprise at all. Every single Star Trek movie ever released in a cinema has featured one of those two men. 13 films. 47 years. That streak ends here, one way or another. And Star Trek has already run this exact experiment once, quietly, in the worst possible way. In January of 2025, Paramount Plus released Star Trek, Section 31, starring Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh. It was supposed to be the proof of concept. A Star Trek story with no Kirk, no Picard, a new corner of the universe, built around a genuinely great actor. Instead, it became the lowest-rated project in the entire history of the franchise, film or television, sitting at around 17 to 20% on Rotten Tomatoes, depending on which week you check the page. For context, that is worse than Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, the one with God living on a mountain in the middle of the galaxy. Section 31 is rated worse than that. Fans and critics were unusually aligned on why. It wasn't the absence of familiar characters that sank it. It was that the movie felt like a generic action thriller wearing a Star Trek costume, with none of the ideas or the character depth that actually make this franchise worth watching for 6 decades. That failure matters enormously for what comes next, because it proves the real risk isn't new characters. Audiences have shown, repeatedly, that they will accept new faces in this universe if the writing respects what Star Trek actually is. The 2009 reboot proved that with completely recast versions of Kirk and Spock, the risk is doing a Star Trek story that forgets to be about anything. So the pressure on Goldstein and Daly is not really about ratings or box office. It's about whether they understand that Star Trek has survived 60 years by being curious about ideas, not just fast in its action scenes. Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves actually suggests they get this. That film worked because it had genuine characters underneath the jokes, even while it underperformed financially, likely due to marketing timing rather than quality. Here's the bigger picture nobody's connecting enough. Star Trek's television side just went quiet too. Starfleet Academy was canceled after its first season, even as fans pushed a petition past 40,000 signatures trying to save it. Discovery, Picard, and Lower Decks have all already wrapped. For the first time in almost a decade, there is no Star Trek show or movie actively filming anywhere. This new movie isn't just a creative experiment. It is currently the only thing keeping this franchise's engines running at all. So here's the actual question worth asking. And it's not, will this movie be good? It's this. Can Star Trek prove that it is a universe of ideas big enough to survive without its two most iconic captains standing at the front of it? Gene Roddenberry built this thing to be about optimism, exploration, and asking uncomfortable questions about who we are. Kirk and Picard were vehicles for that, not the point of it. If Goldstein and Daly remember that this could be the reset the franchise actually needs. If they forget it, we already know exactly what that looks like because we watched it happen in January of 2025, and it currently sits at the bottom of the Rotten Tomatoes list for a reason. Let me know in the comments what era of Star Trek you'd want this new movie to explore, and whether you think a Star Trek movie can actually work without a Starship Enterprise on screen at all. See you in the next one.